Welcome, everybody, to the show. This is a very special edition of Your First 1,000 Clients. And today, this is a part 2 conversation about something that I believe is vital to the future of this country and maybe to humanity. In part 1, we talked about the Nexus cryptocurrency. I have both founders on the call with me today. We covered a little bit about the technology behind it, the blockchain, and all of the elements of how it works. We also covered a little bit about the evolution of cryptocurrency and how it's moved from the original thesis created around Bitcoin and now into a more refined and evolutionary version of that, which my guests believe is the Nexus.io system that they have already shared with us. Today, we're going to go even deeper, and we're going to go not so much into the technology as we are into the implications for society. Not just society, but communities, for people, for health, for finance, for banking, and most importantly, for humanity. And I say humanity because there's never really been a system that removes the trust factor completely from the way we are and the way we work. I'll tell one quick story. When I was a little boy, my mom was a jeweler, and she used to go down to the Diamond District in New York City. And in the Diamond District, you would see these Hasidic Jewish men all dressed in black with the payasses, curly sideburns, and weird hats and all. And they'd be walking around with little crumpled up paper bags. Most people didn't realize is that inside those bags were millions of dollars worth of diamonds. And they would walk into one of the other members of the community and drop that bag on the counter and walk out. Well, there were no contracts. There was nothing but trust. And that community operated for hundreds of years on the concept of trust until eventually that broke down as new members of the community joined. But that old system of total and complete trust is something we have been missing and lack today. So let me reintroduce my guests. We have two very important members of the team with us today, and both of them have been involved from the beginning. The founder of this is Colin Cantrell. Am I pronouncing that right, Colin?
Yeah, Colin Cantrell.
Okay. And what Colin has done from the very beginning is he conceptualized the system, and he was able to technically bring it into focus and then actually code it with himself and his team. The other member of this call today is Philip Lee. Now, Philip is a visionary, and I wouldn't call him a partner so much as he is an ambassador to the company. Is that right, Philip?
Yeah, I'm an ambassador for the Nexus Embassy.
Can I make a quick correction too? The whole entire system, a lot of times we see legacy mindsets with it. And that's one of the things that can segue into the philosophy of it is like, it's a different mindset. So it's actually a community driven global, basically like borderless country. So there's nonprofits. Essentially, there's one in the US that we use as far as like to interface with the legacy system, but it really is a global democracy, kind of like the United States was intended to be a republic. And it's not necessarily a classification of company. And it wasn't issued like you see a lot of ICOs. There was never an ICO. There was never a fundraising. There's no shares in a company, right? It's a global decentralized democratic system. I just wanted to clarify that.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And we're going to go a little bit deeper right now just into that concept. So let's start with Bitcoin. Bitcoin, I think we chatted about this in the last episode. Bitcoin's value comes from the fact that there's a limited number of coins available, number one. Number two, that it is completely decentralized. Stormtroopers can't come in and shut it down because there's thousands of servers all over the world. And number three is that because the number of coins is limited. And the way the limitation with Bitcoin works is that they go through a process they call halving, halving, halving. And what that means is that every 4 years, the value generated from mining these coins drops in half. What this has done is provided a way to increase the value of the coin by making it more scarce. But ultimately, there will never be more than 21 million Bitcoins mined. Hence the rush for billionaires like Michael Saylor and others to accumulate these coins. And in some ways, what they're doing is they're kind of recreating the world we have now, where billionaires are in charge of the bulk of the currency, and the rest of us can have a millionth of a coin as spending money. Well, we want to get away from that. And frankly, that as we can see, as the entire crypto community and crypto markets at the time of this recording have been crashing very regularly, we want to change the paradigm. And I have never really seen anything other than this Nexus IO protocol even attempt to do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with a basic question. The basic question is, please tell me the exact but substantial differences between what Bitcoin is and what the Nexus IO protocol is.
Very briefly to start, since you're talking about the economic model, Bitcoin halving, right? That's one thing that limits the supply, but it's come with certain costs economically, right? You lose half of your rewards overnight. And that can be very shocking to the industry. So the price has to double before that halving in order to maintain the same level of security, because Bitcoin security is dependent on the price. Because when it's a higher price, it's more profitable to mine, more people are mining it, it's more difficult to control that consensus. But as we've noticed, we've seen the first halving, I think, was $400, and then it went up to $800, and I think it was 2016, the second halving. And then there was a more recent halving where it had to gain 4,000 to 8,000. But as you're familiar, Mitch, with markets, as they grow in liquidity, it also exponentially grows in resources required to move the market, right? So now that we're at 20,000, I'm suspecting by the next halving, based on the pattern I've seen, it'll be 40,000, and it'll have to gain $40,000 on $40,000. It could work this time or it could not. One problem that Bitcoin has is potential for deflationary collapse. And what I mean by this is, if, let's say, the block, this next halving in 2024, does not reach the required threshold to remain profitable, a lot of miners are going to jump off. They're going to go start mining Bitcoin Cash or Bitcoin SV or any other coin that their ASIC can mine. And what's going to happen is Bitcoin retargets its difficulty. The difficulty is just how difficult that problem is, and that regulates how fast the blocks come in. That adjusts every 2016 blocks. So at a 10-minute block time, that roughly is about 2 weeks. But let's say half the miners jump off because it's half as profitable mine, right? Now that 2 weeks is now 1 month, right? Because your block time is going to be reduced in half. It gets slower and slower. And so what could happen is this type of death spiral, right? Where every time this halving happens, if it doesn't reach that threshold, miners can jump off, which slows down the chain, which slows its ability to actually retarget its difficulty. And it could end up having a stuck chain. So one of the really important distinctions that we did, one of the first things I actually did is no reward halving. Because pre-Nexus, I was a miner, right? I just got into crypto and I started mining it and learning how that worked. And overnight, I was doing good. I was making enough for rent. And then all of a sudden, boom, reward halved, right? And now my profit was just completely gone. And I had to move to another coin, right? Because I couldn't maintain the profits and cover the electricity costs. So with Nexus, we have a very slow, gradual change where every single minute, the value of the block changes, right? And it's, instead of it being this half-life, which is if anybody's familiar with radioactive decay, you've probably heard the word half-life. That basically means the time it takes for half of the radioactivity to be gone. But radioactivity doesn't go like, hey, it's been half the time, so I'm going to dump out half of everything immediately. It does it slowly over time. And so we use that same equation for radioactive decay. It's, E to the negative KT. And so we have this slow change in it. So we have our reward halving, but not a certain block. It halves over a half-life over a period of time. So it's a very gradual reduction in the supply. Right.
So what I'm hearing is that you've improved the way the halving system works.
Yes.
Now, of course, like Bitcoin, you also have a ultimate limit to the number of coins that can be mined. Is that right?
No, it's slightly inflationary based off of gold. So if you're familiar, gold holds value because it's very rare, but people are still mining gold. So there's still a slight amount of gold that's coming to the market every year, right? That's what Nexus does. It has a period of an initial distribution until 2024 to about 78 million coins. And then it's about 0.5% non-compounded after that to maintain security in the mining system. And the reason we did that is because with Bitcoin, as the rewards have, what's going to happen is going to more and more stress on the transaction fees. And if the transaction fees can't meet the demand for the mining, then security is going to collapse, right? And since Bitcoin's security model is purely based off of how much Bitcoin is available to be mined, they could end up having some pretty severe issues. So we made Nexus slightly inflationary so that there's always going to be a mature industry around the mining, right? That's constantly emitting coin, but it decompounds. So I think in 100 years, there will be 100 million coins, right? And it's only about 450,000 per year. And we made this tightly regulated too. So you can check any point in the future and know exactly how much will be produced because I made it a precise measurement. It's not dependent on the time. Like with Bitcoin, if block time doubles, then the supply speed doubles, right? So it's independent.
I think I understand. So let me ask you this. With Bitcoin, the only real attraction basically has no use other than to hoard and collect. So the real attraction is the fact that it will eventually be more valuable because there eventually will be few of them available. So does the Nexus model sort of promote the idea that if you get in early, your coins will be more valuable later? Or is that not part of the way the Nexus coin and Nexus system works?
I mean, it's assumed for certain people that if you buy it at a low price and it grows in adoption, that the value is going to increase. That's not our primary focus.
Okay.
But we've created an interesting way with our economic model where Bitcoin relies on no more emitting of a currency once it reaches that maximum amount of coins, and then it relies on transaction fees to maintain security. What we did is we made it slightly inflationary. So miners will always be getting some Nexus, right? It decays to a minimum of one Nexus. But transaction fees for processing smart contracts are burned, right? So that deflates the currency as it's inflated. So more use of the currency actually causes more fees to take the Nexus out of supply. So we can counteract the inflation and maintain some level of value like Bitcoin where it's very scarce, but it allows it to be, it doesn't rely solely on transaction fees because you could have low network activity at one point. And if it's always relying on the network transaction fees, then you could have serious dives in network security. With us, it'll always maintain that security because there's always going to be a predictable amount of Nexus emitted. And then as more network usage happens, then it deflates the actual supply. So at a certain point of usage, there will be an equilibrium where the use of the network and the mining fees basically equalize each other. And then if the network usage increases above that, then we're going to have a deflationary cycle where it's going to actually reduce the money supply, which will make it more scarce and more valuable. So it creates this double-pronged benefit as more people adopt the technology and build decentralized applications on it. They're able to actually contribute to the reduction of supply in the economic model.
Okay, so I have one more question about power. Now, one of the criticisms of Bitcoin, of course, as everybody realizes, is that it takes a lot of electricity to mine a coin. And without getting into all the details, is the Nexus mining process as power hungry as a Bitcoin, or is it less so?
Overall, as we get to the size of Bitcoin and its capacity, will consume a lot of power as well. And that's just part of the need. I couldn't see any way around the mining just for the cost to create the coin, to create the currency, because you need physical resources to actually generate, just like you're mining gold. And so that was a really important part of the security model, which is why we maintain the mining. But one thing that we've done to counteract that is Bitcoin proof of work is useless for anything but Bitcoin. All you can do is verify this work was done for these transactions, and that's it. With Nexus, we actually have a scientific proof of work. I developed a prime number searching algorithm to prove the Little-Hardywood theorem, which kind of calculates density of prime numbers, right? And prime numbers are really important for cryptography as well. So our whole blockchain is a prime number database as well. And then we have another channel called proof of stake, but this is a type of trust-based proof of stake. And that checks and balances with the mining so that you don't have one sole authority of block creation. It's checked and balanced between the hash channel and the prime channel, and then the proof of stake channel.
Also, I think the right question is not how much energy does it use, but is it worth it? Because we're going to be replacing the banking system, and how much energy do all these physical banks use? And so
you're right, but we're trying to contrast to Bitcoins. So right now, what I'm seeing is that, again, based on in the simplicity of the way I think about it, with Nexus, there is a cost to mine. There are no limits to the ultimate number of coins mined, but the value of a coin is not the primary objective as it is with Bitcoin. The next question really takes us away from the technical side of this, which, although I appreciate, I think we've probably lost a few of our listeners already, but I want to move on to really the core of this conversation. The core of this conversation is the vision for a society that can become completely dependent on the system for trust as opposed to the human element, which is not as reliable for trust. Explain how that works in the way of regular transactions. You made broad statements like this will replace the banking system. We've heard those statements before from other technology companies. Why do you believe that? And I know you guys sincerely believe that. Tell me why, and forget the cryptology part, forget the prime number stuff. Let's get into the philosophy of this. Why is this important? And why would it actually replace a actual multi-trillion-dollar environment that is already in place?
I'll start it with a little bit of a philosophy, kind of looking at history, right? As we were talking earlier, and our past, right? So let's look at the world 500 years ago. I'm pretty sure it's around that. Authority, right? Trust. was given to the state, right? To the church, right? The church held that they had a connection with God and their connection to that. And so the authority of information came from the church. And then this method came around called the scientific method. And what it did is it said, okay, well, now we're switching the way that we create trust. Instead of it being you're an authority, and so therefore your authority is what I gain trust from. It came from verification, independent verification, where people would no longer trust something as fact unless they could replicate this themselves. And that scientific method is really important to understand because we can see the results of it. We can see all this modern day technology. If technology was based off of an authority, I don't think we would have as much as we have today, right? It's the ability for people to check and balance each other that really made science become what it is today. So think of philosophically, right? That same concept is happening on a computer in an automated way. When you're running a Nexus wallet, you're verifying your peers so that the authority of information, the authority of truth no longer is based on an authority, but it's based off of my ability to verify you, right? And that philosophy is the fundamental driving philosophy for why I believe the banking system, the legacy banking system, is going to eventually be replaced. Because Buckminster Fuller said, you don't change things by fighting the existing reality. You change things by creating a new model that renders the existing model obsolete. And centralized model, right, becomes obsolete, especially as population grows. If we've seen Hurricane Katrina, that's a good example of centralized management issues. There was not a decentralized disaster response team, so they couldn't get enough supplies because they always had to run it through one place, or you have to ship this to Chicago and back here or whatever else, right? There's all these. So centralization is reaching points where people are recognizing the issues with it. Another one is you don't necessarily have authority over your own money, right? The banking system is solely reliant on I'm loaning the bank my money, and the bank can do whatever they will with it. And if you've been keeping up what's happening in China or been happening, there's been bank runs, right? Banks, depending on what perspective you see, from what I understand, banks don't always keep all of that on vault. They tend to go and use it to invest in stock markets or buy shares in other banks and anything like that. And they share all this money. And so the money that we put in the bank is not really ours. And what's happening in the world today, whatever our opinion may be on it, I think what I'm seeing very strongly is a drive for people to start to take things into their own hands a little bit more and to have some more sovereign responsibility. And I think that's the next step that we need as society, right? For all of us to start to be able to become independent free thinkers and check and balance one another. So that fundamental philosophy is really what drives it, is decentralization. Is they say power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. The way that you protect against that is you don't have too much power concentrated in one area. It needs to be distributed out. That's the first thing. And the second thing is centralization is the linear relationship between people and profits, right? Typical company models, you have a linear relationship. I invest this much money into a product, I sell it, I earn this much ROI, right? What's really beautiful about networks and what's really powerful about them, and this has been more recently understood through what's called Metcalfe's law, and this was done by just studying telecommunication systems, is that they found that networks actually multiply value exponentially, right? V equals N squared. So at this point right now that we're at, we're still small, right? They've got a multi-trillion-dollar business, hundreds of trillions of dollars in equity powering all of this, but their power is derived from the people that use their system. So when we create a new system, solves a lot of these issues, makes it safer to interact, basically cutting out middlemen, reduces your overall costs, it increases your security, and it's also a new economic system that we have some sort of influence over, right? We help build it. Then it changes the entire dynamic where they're scaling linearly and they'll only scale linearly. But if we take a graph of a linear curve, an exponential curve, at the beginning, the exponential is going to be behind, but it surpasses it, right? So that's why I really am a firm believer in it, because it's not just the concepts and philosophies that it's going to bring something to a wider global adoption, but it's also the timing, right? And the time we're at right now, like, I don't think we could be better timed for coming with this type of technology, especially we've been developing it 8 or 9 years, right? So we're very, very well along. And the world right now is just starting to wake up to realize, wait, some of these people that we've looked for, their authorities that are supposed to care for us, don't seem like that they're providing that. And so
Sure. Philip, what is your viewpoint as far as how this would impact the society that views this as an alternative to a centralized system? And why would someone who has $1 million in Bank of America all of a sudden say, well, I'll just move that money into the Nexus system, and now I will then disperse it through the Nexus coin to purchase the services and goods that I want? Explain that to me.
Well, So the motto for Nexus is connecting a decentralized world. And the first time I heard it, I thought it sounded cool, but I didn't really understand the significance of it because it's pretty huge. You have to kind of understand history to understand how important it is. Because if you're paying attention to the world economy right now, I think it's pretty obvious that things are starting to fall apart. And we've gone through this very long period of globalization where large corporations from rich countries basically exploit cheap labor from poorer countries. And that's how these corporations are able to get so large. So this has led to a dissatisfaction in the working class everywhere and here in America as well. And that's part of the reason why like Trump was able to become so popular is because he had that message, make America great again. And for a lot of people, that just meant being able to find a job in America. And so there's now this feeling of resentment towards corporations and the system in general. So this era of globalism is coming to an end and people are becoming more tribal in nature. And if you look throughout history, whenever there's tough economic times, people become more tribal. If you look at the fall of the Roman Empire, it was followed by the Dark Ages. And the Dark Ages were the time of tribalism. And Colin has pointed out to me that the reason the Dark Ages are dark was because people weren't traveling, and people don't travel, then information doesn't travel. And what brought us out of the Dark Ages was increased interaction between different cultures.
Of course. So let me ask you a question, just to go back a step here. I get what you're saying. I want to bring it into modern times. This tribalism that you discussed, I see that reflected in the thinking of people today. I see that reflected 5 years ago. We were pushing just-in-time inventory. We were testing globalized supply chains. And we were talking about even the possibility of operating as a one-world environment. Now that's all changed. Without getting into the political aspects of it, one ruler or dictator or one president or one individual says, I want more of that country's land, and they decide to take it, or they declare that that was originally ours anyway, so we're taking it back. Well, now what happens is people, as you described a minute ago, people pull back and say, well, now we don't want to source anymore from that country. We want to be able to be self-sustaining. We want to be able to self-fulfill our own needs. And again, Trump, if you want to talk about some of the good things he did, there's plenty of bad things people say he did, and I agree. But one of the good things he did is he wanted to uncentralize or decentralize our supply chains and bring more of what we needed as a country back into this country, which, as we've all noticed, has become a trend now with every country because we can't depend on each other anymore to do that. So now when you talk about this, Philip, and you talk about Nexus sort of being in the middle of this, how does that work? First of all, why would I trust it? Second of all, if I have my $1 million inside the Nexus system, how would I transact with another company? Would it have to be converted back to fiat in order to be used? And by the way, would the government, just as we've seen in the past, want to ban this or any other cryptocurrency because of the fear of loss of the ability to tax? So talk a little bit about that, because without that, there is no true way to turn what you have into something that universally could be used.
Can I take this pitch just to preface a little to start? I just wanted to add an idea. This is something Phil and me have been working on a lot, because you bring up a really valid point is, okay, if I want to use this as a currency, I need to make sure it's not volatile. In order to get it to not be volatile, it needs to be adopted. But in order to get people to adopt it, it has to be not volatile, right? A circular dependency. And we've really focused on the near interim. This is something Phil can preface, and for you, little Phil, too, is like food production, right? Localized food production and trade, right? Where people that, let's say, have an apricot tree in their yard can registry, and people can start trading and create their own currency, basically based off of the weight of this produce, so that people can start interacting and using the technology in a way that doesn't necessitate buying the currency, right? The utility is really important to build before you get to the adoption of the currency. You can't have utility come after the adoption. The adoption comes as a result of the utility in a way that relates to people in their everyday lives. So somebody will be able to use Nexus at some point and say, hey, I'm going to the farmer's market in town, and I look and there's some orders for people that are selling tomatoes. My neighbor's selling tomatoes. I can go buy these tomatoes from them, right? And they can use regular fiat currency. But that bridge is really, really fundamentally important. And we focused on doing that by seeing the blockchain and the cryptocurrency as a subset of a larger framework, right? We're focused on improving the web and our overall connectivity through decentralized services, peer-to-peer marketplaces, and your ability also is for the community to create your own localized currencies.
And I'd like Philip to talk more about that. He has I think, a more worldly vision of this in a non-technical way, which I relate to more easily. So Philip, tell me what you think.
So I just want to make clear, I'm not for or against Trump. I've completely lost faith in the political system. For me, the solution is economic secession. I've been looking at human behavior for a while now, and it seems like people don't really change because they want to. They change because they have to. An example would be my friend who's a former professional poker player. He used to play online in these tournaments, and that was until the government banned online gambling sites. So what happened was people started to play poker for Bitcoin instead of dollars. So it's kind of like this legal loophole. So that's an example of use case outside the system. It's not like they wanted to play for Bitcoin. They just didn't have any other choice. So I think in the same way, the use case for Nexus will be kind of like outside the system. So personally, I think people will use Nexus because it'll give them the ability to buy food. Right now, we're going through energy shortages, and energy shortages lead to food shortages. So if people want to eat, more and more people are going to have to start growing their own food. And I think this is going to create a need for a more efficient way to distribute food, because it's now going to be a decentralized food supply. We might not be able to find everything we need at the grocery store. We're going to have to buy from other people. So we're going to need this peer-to-peer marketplace, which is what Nexus is currently developing. And this is not like other cryptos. When you think decentralized exchange, it's just like tokens. But I'm thinking more of like real items, like food. I know the Nexus Latin American Embassy is currently working on this project to grow food on rooftops. So I think these kinds of decentralized food markets are going to pop up more and more. And the goal for Nexus is to kind of create this like online decentralized Silk Road, but for food.
So let me ask you a question related to what you just said. Why do I need Nexus to do that? Why can't I create basically a directory that I could sort by distance of people who are growers or growing food? And then when I find someone I want their products, I go and transact with them no matter what I'm transacting with, whether it be fiat, Bitcoin, Ethereum, or Nexus. Why is Nexus even important in this regard?
Trust.
Yeah. I mean, to make a peer-to-peer marketplace is not easy. It's very complicated. And all these projects are trying to do it, but they're full of security flaws and they get hacked all the time, or they're not scalable. And we have that blockchain trilemma that most of these projects haven't been able to solve, but Nexus is on its way to solving. Now, I was at a farmer's market the other day, and I was thinking about how I could convince people to use Nexus to buy food. And I think, it's unrealistic to think that I can convince people to go through the hassle of learning how to use crypto just to spend like $20 on vegetables. But maybe for large purchases, like large pre-orders, if you want to buy, say, 100 pounds of tomatoes or something, you could purchase that online, pre-purchase it online, and then pick it up at the farmer's market.
But I don't see why I would need Nexus to do that. In other words, let's say you have tomatoes and I want them, and you say, sure, send me $20 and you can come pick up your tomatoes. If you don't send the $20, you don't get the tomatoes. If you do send the $20, I'm not there and you can't find me or something, then I guess the money was stolen from me. But I don't know if that's something that would happen often enough to be a concern, because once you did that, you'd never be a trusted vendor. Nobody would ever buy food from you again. So I'm trying to understand why this particular cryptocurrency can do these amazing things that I can't do without it. That's what I'm striving to understand better.
I answered the question. I'll do my best to explain it non-technically, but trust, right? If I go and I buy these tomatoes, I can send you the money, but there's very little recourse for me to receive that money back if there's no product. Then you have this registration system that requires you to vet all of these people, which requires you to be trustworthy. And it creates this circular dependency of trust, right? With Nexus, it also creates middlemen too, right? So if the incentives, right, if you have your platform, you may have to pay a fee, a trade fee in order to use this platform. With Nexus, what it does is it's an open-ended software development kit, basically. So the marketplace will just allow people to create a token, basically in response, like grew 1,000 tomatoes, I make 1,000 tokens. You put it for sale on the market, and that being a geospatial market, other people discover it, but then you use a smart contract that engages an escrow, right? So I'll put my money into the escrow to prove to you, let's say I'm buying tomatoes from you, Mitch. I prove to you I have the money. I put it in the escrow contract. You put the 100 tomatoes that I'm buying from you into the escrow contract, and you have the transportation issue. You can either go and you can pick it up, and then both of you can sign and agree, and then the funds are released to you, and then I get my tomatoes. Or let's say it's something across town and I don't have the capability to pick it up. Let's say it's a large load. That's where you get into the peer-to-peer transportation system, right? As we've seen Uber, right? Uber was so powerful because it was somewhat decentralized. It still ran through a centralized framework, but it allowed anyone with a car to start driving people around. So we're building a similar model as a part of the peer-to-peer exchange. You have the escrow contract, which is really important. And then you have the tokenization of supply and discovery of the orders. And then the third thing is transportation. So with crypto, right? For instance, I can put $1,000, let's say I'm Phil's the driver, and he puts $1,000 into a smart contract that says, hey, this is my collateral. Now, Phil, having that collateral now, can go and engage and transport escrow contracts. So, hey, he's got tomatoes. It's $100 worth of value. So he picks up that contract, and then he, through the blockchain, will be the custodian, temporary, of those tokens, and then transport the tomatoes. And then ideally, he would sign with the buyer to say, here's your tomatoes. The buyer will say, the tomatoes look good. Okay, you transported them here. I'm happy with that. And then they'll both sign. And so it'll take 2 of 3 signatures to release. Or if Phil never gets the tomatoes, and the seller's like, well, I gave him the tomatoes, and the buyer's like, I gave the money. Well, then Phil's basically deposit would be forfeited to the person that lost the material, right?
So what I'm hearing, let me just unpack this a bit. What I'm hearing is that you're getting rid of the centralized computer system that runs the transportation system. So in other words, but someone smart who knows how to program appears to be needed to create these marketplaces. And it sounds like what you're doing is building the toolkit for that. So I can build
marketplace too. We built the tool so other people can launch marketplaces. Like one such use case is carbon credits, right? There's a double spending problem with carbon credits. So there's a use case called the biological and ecosystems futures, and they managed to solve the double spending problem with the blockchain. And now they're going and making waves out in the world, and they have a full carbon credits trading platform just from that API. We're developing a marketplace on top of Nexus, right? Because this is something Phil and me have kind of been working as a joint project, is focusing on food and transportation. Those are 2 really important things. Because looking at just the world's needs, like there's potential for food shortages, and there's supply chain issues and transportation issues. So that solves all those problems. And it also, there's a big problem with Uber and the management, and people have not liked the CEO or the way they spend their money. And they take 20% of everything. This transportation app, since it's decentralized, it wouldn't have any infrastructure required to run it. Everybody's phones is the infrastructure. So it's free, right? All you have to do is deposit in if you want to transport merchandise, or you can transport people, or semi-truck drivers would be able to get involved. So there's a couple platforms that we're developing on top of Nexus. One of them is like my music platform. And then Phil and me are working on this decentralized peer-to-peer trade platform. And then obviously the transportation platform is really important. And it's pretty easy to see how successful that would be by looking at Uber and Lyft, right? And those that have made their waves, even with 20% fee. I think Lyft charged less fee, and that's why people started moving to Lyft. So in times when gas price is $6, everyone's going to be looking to shave those dollars off. So that's the incentive for people to move into this new infrastructure.
I think I get it. So now I guess what I'm hearing is Nexus, we removed the middleman. Our goal is to provide you with the same services as before, but no need for customer service, no need for a middle person, because you either receive what you are paying for or you don't. And that is the trust-based equation. Now, let's talk about human nature here. Right now, you know what? I'll pay Uber to pick up and get a ride. I may not like Uber. I may not like the CEO. And the driver might not really love driving for Uber either. And they do take a percentage of his earned money, but it works and it's growing. Where's the breaking point in what we have today that would force people to take a look at this and say, oh my God, this is what we've been looking for. Let's adopt this. Or does that not really ever occur? Is it more gradual, one little marketplace at a time? You know, in cities, we don't have farms in cities, not too many of them. So that model in a city environment may not work. So where's the inflection point? Because I'm having a hard time understanding that.
Yeah, the inflection point I've always said is when the risk to remain in the current system exceeds the risk to join the new system, right? So as we've seen, 80% of all the US dollars have been printed in the last 2 years. Inflation's 10, 12%. Food's not being stocked on all the grocery store shelves. So the system that we've felt safe with is starting to feel less and less safe. So Nexus being new, right? People are going to naturally perceive that as not being as safe until the safety of the system kind of reduces and the safety of Nexus increases. So we develop technology to help make it safer, right? Like you cut out the middleman, you reduce counterparty risk, such as transportation, right? You reduce costs overall. You create local self-sustaining economies and also give people that power, right? That's one thing that I found that was really, really powerful thing to different people that are looking to develop communities off the grid or whatever is they've always come to the currency problem and they're using these US dollars. And even if you use a stable coin pegged to the US dollar, there's still inflation happening, right? So people can fire up their own local token in their own economy. So I see there's going to be a breaking and an inflection point, definitely. And we're already seeing signs of that with Bitcoin and the adoption over the last few years as uncertainty in the system increases. Then it seems a lot better to be using these new systems, right? Especially since a lot of the issues we're seeing presently are really a result of bad leadership and people in power that are making decisions that aren't for the best interests of the people, right? So that it's going to cause people, if they don't care, like we got to do something ourselves, but what are we going to do? Go hold signs and protest? That doesn't really seem to work. So it creates a new avenue for people to be able to express those things, right? And it'll take time, obviously, to adopt, but that's why we focus on these technologies, like a bit different than a lot of crypto, where they're like decentralized finance, and we're going to change the whole banking system, and we're going to make countries run on it and everything. We're starting simple in relatable ways. And that's what our primary focus now has like been on food, right? The next step on music and then transportation, because art's a really big thing, right? And there's a whole big issue with record labels that people know about them not taking care of people. And I'm really seeing demonstrated in the world today is that there's a big issue with the corporations and the control that all of these corporations have over all of our daily lives when they're unelected individuals, right? So that natural mistrust creates this lack of safety in our current system where people look for alternatives. And the safest thing that I think any of us can have is the ability to take these things into our own hands and have a system that supports that, right? And it verifies it too. So that's another really, really important thing about this that makes Nexus more desirable than, let's say, the banking system is you can audit anything. The embassy that we work here, it's completely financially transparent. Anyone can go look at every little bill. They can see how much I'm being paid, how much Phil's being paid, how much everyone's being paid. So it creates this new level of transparency, which helps develop that trust. Like as I was saying in the earlier part, the philosophy of verification, independent verification, allowing people to verify things for ourselves. This allows that to happen. And same with like the trading. If somebody has tomatoes and they go to put them for sale and somebody goes to pick them up and the tomatoes aren't there, that contract's going to be canceled, but that contract is on the blockchain. So that adds to the reputation of that individual. And so you have this permanent record per se that can't ever be manipulated. And we get assurance that it can't because of the math and the cryptography.
Okay, so let's start to wrap this up a little bit. So I'm going to summarize and you add to what I say. If I get it wrong or if you want to take what I say and take it to the next level, that's very welcome. So what I am hearing is that you are creating a platform for the future based on cryptology that will allow the average person to build structures like marketplaces and run them frictionless without a profit for their efforts. But more importantly, by creating this market, they will be served by that market as well. So if I chose or you choose to create a market for the music system or for musicians to trade coins for talent or money or performances or recordings or rights, all of that can be completely controlled inside the Nexus platform. And it's frictionless, meaning that there are no fees involved to do it. So if I'm hearing this and I say, well, geez, I might like to develop a marketplace after listening to this podcast, why would I do it? What's my incentive for doing it other than the fact that it's good for the world or something? In other words, how do I get paid if I'm going to invest time and money and create a tool based on the Nexus platform?
So there is a fee model that you can add. Like the carbon credits trading platform obviously isn't for free. People pay for different services depending on what market. As far as relating to the food markets, we're building that as just a web platform that anyone, all you have to do is just create an account, kind of like creating an email account. That's all you'll need to do to sell your tomatoes. there won't really be a need for you to create a local market, but if you want to, you can. And like I said, there is a fee model built into the API if you as an entrepreneur want to build a fee-based market. Us personally, since we're developing this market, we're making it free and usable so anyone in any place in the world can just log in and create a market based on whatever token just by clicking a couple buttons instead of having to code.
Got it. Okay. Phil, any last words? Anything you want to add to this conversation that would elevate I would say, the value of what you guys are doing, and so that other people can see it and want to know more and take it from there?
So we've been throughout history going through this cycle of like good economy followed by globalism, and then that leads to a bad economy followed by tribalism. And this cycle just kind of repeats itself over and over. And the reason why globalism leads to a bad economy is because of centralization. When just a few individuals have power over many different countries, and eventually that centralization of power gets corrupted and people get greedy, and inequality between the rich and the poor gets too wide, and then the economy collapses. So if we wanted to stop that cycle, we would want to do it at a point where the economy is good, but before it reaches that point of globalism. And we can do that by staying tribal, I think, because tribalism is just a form of decentralization. And the problem with tribalism in the past was that barrier to the free flow of information. But things are different now because we now have the internet. The internet changes everything, but it has to be uncensorable, which is why blockchain is so important and why I'm so passionate about Nexus, because that's the only way we can have a decentralized, uncensorable internet. So we can finally break that cycle that has been going on for thousands of years, and just by connecting all of us while simultaneously remaining decentralized. And you mentioned earlier, like, what's in it for you? I mean, I think in order to create a world of abundance, like, we can all be rich. Every one of us can be rich, but we have to change the system. If you look at the Nexus community, I think we're kind of a rare breed at the moment. I would say we're kind of like spiritual nerds, because it kind of takes a nerd to really sit down and try to understand what Nexus is all about. But it's not just about understanding the tech. We want to use it to help society, and that's what makes it spiritual. So I'm very thankful to have found this community, because we have this blend of both logic and intuition, because we need both of those things to have an accurate view of what the world is like today. Because most people are just focused on logic or intuition, but we really need both. So if there's, people out there that think like that, I hope you would join the Nexus community, because that's how we'll grow. And that's what Nexus is really about, is about community.
So what I also want to say here as we come to an end, what I am basically understanding now better than I did the first time we had our conversation is that, yes, there is a very strong technology base to what you're doing, but that's not really what's important at all. What appears to be important, and what I'm getting from this, is that what you guys are doing is you're on a mission. You're on a mission to create a tribal world of which tribes become equal and can trade with each other and share with each other without conflict and 100% transparency and trust. And that is not something that I perceive any other cryptocurrency is doing. And that's, I think, what the big difference is. So if people are interested in finding out more, if they'd like to maybe investigate your tribe, or maybe have a profit motive and want to develop something around Nexus, where do they go?
You can go to nexus.io. A lot of our community hangs on Telegram right now too. So we're on Twitter, Nexus Official. If you want to message us there, there's Nexus Community, and it's Nexus Community, or I think it's Nexus Official for Telegram. We can post some links.
Yeah, post some links in our chat, and then we'll put them on your show page. And again, listeners, I hope this was intriguing. It's different than what we normally do on this show, but I thought the vision was what impressed me most. The strong technology, architecture, and foundation enables a vision that I personally have not quite seen anywhere else. And that's why I invited these two crazy guys onto my show today, because I think they bring something very important to the party. And maybe not right now, but maybe it's a bubbling cauldron that soon will create something very valuable that I would love to hear whether or not you choose to get involved with or not, because we need something like this. We may not need Nexus. Nexus might not be the solution, but what these guys are pointing at and pointing to is a very viable solution. And potentially Nexus could be the engine that powers it. So, gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. It's been quite a haul getting these interviews done. But I've also enjoyed it a lot, learning more about you both and about the system. So, gentlemen, again, thank you for your time. Thank you for the information. And listeners, please go to nexus.io and dig in a little bit and let me know what you think.
Can I add
Thanks, guys.
one closing thought?
Yes, please.
For anybody that's wanting to join, there's something really important to add to is like this technology supports the philosophy, right? And the philosophy is decentralization and just helping us just learn to live lives and resolve conflicts in a correct way. But if we've looked at social systems for the last thousands of years, they haven't really changed. You have like kings and you have democracies and republics, but very basic, still like you have a leader and you have the people to follow. Nexus is a new decentralized social system as well. So when you join the community, you can get involved in the DAO and be a part of this new social experiment where we've developed social architecture that doesn't have CEOs or leaders or anyone in control. I'm the founder, but I'm just one cog in that wheel. So I invite you, if you're interested to learn and help developing these new structures, it's really important because the social structure system too could be something that could support our own self-governance in the future, right? In a way that protects against the human nature element, like you were talking about, Mitch, and what people are naturally wanting to do. And it protects that through a social system as a type of social technology that's woven together through software, right? So I just wanted to bring that to attention too. We invite you to come get involved and be a part of it because it's a community-driven project and it's a fun new experiment.
Of course. And you don't hear this from the people at Ethereum. You don't hear this from the other types of cryptocurrency out there. That's why I like what you're doing. It's not just a cryptocurrency. It's not just a piece of technology. It is a structure for the future communities of the world. So thank you again, gentlemen.
Thank you.
And I look forward to our next conversation.
Thanks.
Likewise.